Okay, everybody, we're about to start. So welcome. Nice to see a nice big turnout. I like to see that. And hello, everybody in digital land. First thing I'd like to mention to you is, anybody remember George Palmer, our one of our previous presidents? He's written a book. It's called Pilot: Surviving a Career in Aviation. Anyway, it's just been released. He popped in one in the mail to me, so if you're interested, I'm sure it'll be available locally in the bookshops. It's that sort of couple of things that have been happening in the aviation world. That MRH-90, which did the ditching where everybody survived, as the final report's been put out, and it was a catastrophic failure of the engine caused by engine blades, which they knew about and the Army had been told about, and the Army said, oh, the chances of it happening are pretty low, so we won't worry about it for the moment. And so they lost an aircraft. And when the next one went down, the government overreacted and cancelled the whole lot. Last month, I mentioned that Haas had picked up the DC-2 that's been hanging around for years and years and years, and they will do a non-flying restoration of that aircraft. But I discovered yesterday that they also have a Catalina. If you remember the cat that was in the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, frigate bird. Well, of course, the politics of the Powerhouse meant that they've gutted the place completely to start all over again, and they've taken everything out and they've handed over the cat to Haas for the time being, supposedly temporary. It'll never, ever leave Haas, I'll guarantee it. They don't want it, it's too big for what they have in mind. All the other aircraft are in storage. Some of them we don't even know where they are. The next thing to mention is our dinner. All of you should have received emails. If you haven't already decided to come, do let Peter know ASAP. Okay, so the other thing to mention, or good thing to mention, is the other things that are going to be coming up. Next month, we have Matt Denning, almost 50 years involvement in boomerang restoration. Some of you would have met him. He flies his CT4 around to a lot of air shows, particularly local ones. We also have Laurie Webb coming up in November, 29th of. LJ Balderson, military aviator and pioneer of RAAF radio. And there's quite a bit in one of the RAAF publications on this guy and his radio work. So come January, Ray Villeman, who some of you might know, who's a Tiger Moth owner, and a 64-year experience in airline and GA training environments. And he lives just around the corner from me up in the Samford Valley. So he comes in 31st of January. A RAAF pilot, tailwheel to Mach 2, Group Captain Mal Herman, whose F-111 is in the Queensland Air Museum and draws all the crowds. John Meyer, who was supposed to be talking to us earlier this year and is still on the open case because he had an operation, but his will be some stage next year, we hope, the RAAF Flying Boat Experience. And that's all we've got in advance at the present moment. I'll introduce Sid, Harbour. You guys know what it's all about because that's why there's so many of you here. We all love 22 Squadron and the Boston. All yours, mate.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for that. Yeah, g'day everyone. My name's Mark Harbour, Sid. With a name like Harbour, I didn't have a choice with a nickname. So that's it. Ex-RAAF, I was a framie, I was an apprentice. I did 12 years in the Air Force. My last 12 months was my token effort on fixed wing, which is on Hercs. And that's where I met Dick Hutchins, who got me down the wormhole of Boston's down at Richmond. So I started on that, and then I've been researching 22 Squadron Bostons for the last 30 years. So I've got probably 500 or 600 photos of RAAF Bostons. A lot of them I won't release because they just get used everywhere, plus the stuff. So this is basically a correlation of everything I've put together for the Bostons. Okay, Bostons. I've broken it into 3 sections. First section is the DB-7Bs. I'll just refer to them as DB-7s, which were the first Bostons we got. Second one is the A-20As and Cs, which were second-hand replacement aircraft as attrition replacements. The third section is about the A-20Gs, which were brand new aircraft organised through the Americans to keep the squadron online. So on that, I'll start with the DB-7 series of light bombers was first designed in 1935 and was one of the foremost light attack bombers used by the Allies in World War II. The DB-7 series is the only light attack bomber used by the Allies in frontline use throughout the whole of World War II. DB-7 was first designed and built for the French with the Douglas Model 7B and ordered by the Belgians. The original DB-7 had 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney twin Wasps, 1830s, same as the C-47 and a lot of other aircraft. While having good performance, the French wanted more, improving the airframe, fitting a larger fin, and fitting 1,600 horsepower Wright twin Cyclones. This became the DB-7A. The US Army Air Corps showed interest in this version, was further improved with a new nose and other airframe improvements, becoming the A-20. With the fall of France, large numbers of DB-7s escaped to the UK and were taken over by the RAAF. The British gave it the name Boston 1. They were the original DB-7s. The new improved DB-7A, which never made it to France before it fell, were delivered to the UK as Boston 2s. Most were converted to night intruder and night fighters. The British, like the DB-7, wanted more improvements in various British mods, radios, etc. The version designated for the British was based on the new US Army Air Corps A-20 and called the DB-7B Boston 3. The British ordered 2 batches of 150 Boston 3s, W series serials and Z series serials. Converting an outstanding French order that had taken over by the RAAF for 480 DB-7s, brought up to the DB-7 version. This was due to Douglas reaching full capacity aircraft building. The order was split between Boeing, who did the lower serial numbers, and Douglas, the higher serial numbers. Now, AL907, the last one built by Douglas, is the Boston at the RAAF Museum. So that was the last original Boston built, building 240 aircraft. While these aircraft were in the same as the original order of DB-7Bs, they are officially referred to as a DB-7-3, as they were converted from the French order the RAAF took over. This batch of 480 DB-7Bs was to contain the 22 Boston 3s operated by the RAAF. Australia's association with the Boston was initiated by events in the Dutch East Indies. The Dutch Navy had ordered 80 DB-7 Bostons from the US in a frantic attempt to modernise the Dutch Navy air arm before the war with Japan. Of this order, 32 were DB-7Bs diverted from a British order, and 48 were to be new built DB-7Cs, built to a Dutch spec with interchangeable solid 20mm cannon nose or bomb aimers noses, with automatic deploying rifle rafts and equipped to carry torpedoes. These 48 DB-7Cs were not completed before the fall of the Dutch East Indies and were completed to DB-7B specs and delivered to the USSR. There's continual rumours about the Cs being in the Pacific, never made it. They were billed as Bs and went to Russia. Of the 32 DB-7Bs dispatched from the US, only 6 were to make it to Java before the Dutch capitulation, and only 1 was made flyable. The Japanese subsequently captured these 6, and 2 and maybe 3 of them were made flying. 1 or 2 with the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force Test Unit, and 1 with the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Force Test Unit. The last aircraft, AL-904, was recovered at Tsugi Naval Air Station in Japan after the war. The remaining 26, 4 still on freighters in the Pacific when the Dutch East Indies fell, returned to the US. These aircraft were taken over as training aircraft with the US Army Air Corps. The remaining 22 on 5 refugee ships landed in Australia after the fall of Java. 9 arrived in Melbourne and transported to 180 Laverton for assembly on the 29th of March 42. 5 arrived in Sydney and towed to 2AD Richmond on 6th of April, and the remaining 8 also into Sydney and towed to 2AD on the 13th of April. These 22 DB-7Bs were issued to 22 Squadron in April 42, with the first of 69 Bostons to be operated by the RAAF. The introduction of the Boston presented numerous problems, i.e. no manuals, no organised training and no tooling. This was exacerbated by the complete lack of understanding or interest in the capability of the aircraft by RAAF HQ. The first problem was tooling. When 2AD and 22 Squadron said they needed tools for the Boston, RAAF HQ responded with, "You already have tools for your Anson and other aircraft that you maintain, use those." RAAF HQ had no understanding of the difference of hardware and hand tools between UK and US built aircraft. The UK used British standard Whitworth tools and hardware, while the US used SAE tooling and hardware. The two are not interchangeable. Pilot training was another issue. None of the RAAF pilots at Richmond at this time had flown a high-performance, tricycle-equipped undercarriage aircraft. This lack of training experience led to the loss of A-20A in May, and only a month after the issue, the 22 Squadron crashed when it failed to take off. This event due to the lack of experience by the pilots in taking off in a tricycle undercarriage aircraft. They were used to the tail raising on the aircraft and then pulling back. Because nothing happened, they didn't know, and they didn't get the feeling of having to pull back on the tricycle gear to get it up, and ran through the fence and got written off. A-20A-17 was also lost after overrunning a strip at Mascot, had an engine fire in the starboard engine, which wrote the aircraft off. The squadron hadn't even converted to Bostons, and they had already written off 2 aircraft. Though one thing with these 2 aircraft was now the primary spares source for the rest of the fleet. The training changed considerably late in June 42 when 4 experienced Boston pilots were posted back from Europe. Harry Craig, Bob Wines, Rocky Mullins and Dick Hunt. These 4 pilots had served with 1451 and 1457 flights on Havoc 1s and Boston 3s. The Havoc 1 is the intruder version of the Boston 1. Boston 3, turbine lights, and with 23 Squadron doing intruder ops over France. These 4 pilots all got DFCs while serving with 22 Squadron, and they were the core of the squadron, and anything that happened usually involved one of them. This is the brand new Bostons arriving in April 42, completely cocooned in plastic, being towed up from the docks all the way out to Richmond. There's 5 more in the line, so that was the late April lot that came in with that. These aircraft were unwanted and unexpected by the RAAF and were only put into service in desperation. In fact, they were only considered an interim aircraft till multi-vengeance dive bombers on order arrived in Australia. We know how successful they were. These Bostons were brand new built advanced aircraft, faster and more advanced than anything currently in RAAF service. They were also the first aircraft in the RAAF with tricycle undercarriage. Were to be the RAAF's primary strike attack aircraft. This was the case for almost 2 years until large numbers of Beaufighters became available. On the right is the paperwork saying that they're only going to be temporary aircraft, and then to show their actual lack of understanding, they actually say their Bostons Australia. It should be noted that the US Air Force type A-20 is not a Boston. Yes, it was. So that's start there. Assembling new machines. This is the old 38 Squadron hangar at Richmond, outside there. After assembly for a short time, 10 were issued on paper to the newly formed 18 Squadron, Netherlands East Indian Air Force RAAF, as the aircraft actually belonged to the NEI government, and 8 A-20As were also issued to 18 Squadron from the newly assembled aircraft with the US 3rd Bomb Group in Melbourne, in exchange for B-25s earmarked for the Dutch but taken by the US 3rd Bomb Group. But the Dutch no longer wanted the Boston as their range was too short for ops over the Netherlands East Indies from Australia, so opted instead for B-25s. In addition, 18 Squadron had no pilots checked out in the DB-7s. The Dutch relinquished ownership of the Bostons to the RAAF. These 10 DB-7s had their transfers cancelled and were returned to 22 Squadron, and the A-20As were returned down to the 89th Bomb Squadron. The US A-20s, which made it to Canberra, were actually flown back to Melbourne by 22 Squadron crews. The crews carried out anti-submarine patrols along the New South Wales coast between May and September 42, as the squadron became operational, the Bostons, and prepared for deployment for operations in New Guinea. This is our initial setup when they were, before they went to New Guinea, still running the glass nose on them, open gun position. And you can see here they've actually added pintle-mounted 3Os in the nose of the aircraft. This was very short-lived because the aircraft were very soon after this put through the strafer modification program. Another one they did was the squadron forward deployed to Charters Towers in September 42 in preparation for the onward move to New Guinea. It was at this time prior to deployment, 303 brandings were added to a ball mount in the nose and fixed in the tails of most Bostons. As Bostons were originally to be operated in the light bomber role, bombing in formations from medium altitude, experience with Bostons in the Middle East was found to have a blind spot directly behind the aircraft and susceptible to attacks directly behind by enemy fighters. At least 10 Bostons had tail guns fitted. A-20A-9 had twins, 303s fitted. A-20A-14 had a 50 cal fitted to it. These tail guns were removed from all Bostons by mid-43 as they proved to be of no use in the low-level attack role, and the 100 pounds plus of weight in the tail was better removed from the aircraft. That's the single 303 mount there, and then you've got, that was DUP, and they actually cut the whole back out and they mounted the 50 cal in that one. But they were all removed by mid-43. The innovative Captain Pappy Gunn of the US Army Air Force developed strafer kits for B-25s and A-20s, converting them from medium and light level bombers into a highly efficient low-level attack aircraft. This consisted of replacing a navigator bomb aimer in the nose with a battery of 450 cals and ammunition. This took the nose armament in the Boston to 4 303s in cheek positions and 450s firing through where the bomb aimer's glass was. The CO at the time, squadron leader R.E. Bell, an experienced pilot with considerable combat experience with 8 squadron flying Hudsons and a desperate fighting through Malaya, Singapore and Java, realised that the role of light bomber in New Guinea was not ideal for the Boston, as most combat was at low-level precision attacks, not straight and level bombing. He, together with Group Captain Garrison, RAAF commander in Port Moresby, decided to get 22 squadrons Bostons onto the end of the US Air Force modification program to 89 Bomb Squadron A-20s at Ambley. Through October 42, Bostons were flown in batches to Ambley to be modified to strafers. As navigators were no longer needed, they were posted out. This modification caused the deployment to New Guinea to be delayed a month. RAAF HQ in Melbourne found out about this delay and subsequent unauthorised modification program and carried out an investigation. Subsequently, Squadron Leader Bell was found to have acted beyond his responsibilities and was issued with an official letter of reprimand in his file and therefore removed as CO. This letter may have slowed his career, but he eventually became CO of 24 Squadron flying B-24s and commanded the Governor-General's flight after the war and was awarded a DFC and AFC and retired a Group Captain in '61. So once again, there was someone that knew what they were doing, got knocked down by RAAF HQ without a clue. This is the strafer set up in the A-20. The A-20 could only take 450s in the nose because of the weight. The B-25 could take more guns, but they decided on a standard setup, and you can actually see the whole mount, the mounting plate with the supports and the 450s, and it was designed to fit within the bomb aimer's glass area on that. And then you can see here the cheek mounted 303s and the 50s in the nose. In the installation, that's the same installation. You can see it's the same mount and everything in the B-25. Obviously, later J models and that had 8 in the nose, so it could take a lot more guns, but they kept with the same for simplification. This is the investigation in the strafer modification. RAAF HQ admitted it was a good mod and it was probably needed to be done, but they didn't like the fact they were kept out of the loop. And so that was the thing for that. One of the things that happened after it was the strafer conversion of 450s and mounts was fitted, added approximately 250 pounds to the aircraft, and 200 rounds per gun added approximately another 600 pounds. This aircraft weight decreased the bomb load from 2,000 pound down to 1,500 pound. And the usual bomb load was two 250 semi-armor piercing or medium case bombs and two 500 pound medium case. The semi-armor piercing bombs were used in the anti-shipping role. 4 aircraft were lost before operation started. 2 on the takeoff incident at Richmond, crashing through the perimeter, 17 landing incident at Mascot, 19 crashed in southeast Queensland. These aircraft became the primary spares sources for the squadron. 12 was blown up by 20-pound training bombs, fragmentation bombs and training. 2 more were lost very early in operations as the 20-pound anti-personnel bombs blew up directly under the aircraft, destroying them and killing the crew. Rumours spread that the problem with the 20-pound bombs had happened overseas and was known about. This was denied by RAAF HQ. 20-pound bombs had blown up under Blenheim aircraft, but they'd never been dropped by Boston's. So there was a bit of a thing with that. And this is the telegram from RAAF HQ's going, yes, there has been issues overseas, but not with Boston's. But we now know it's a problem, so basically don't do it. The squadron started 43 almost down. There were a total of 14 Bostons in Port Moresby and 2 in Australia. The squadron was to operate at a hectic rate right through 43, participating in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea and multiple raids on Lae and Salamaua, culminating in the award of the VC, Flight Lieutenant W.E. Newton. This was 2 devastating raids on Salamaua on the 16th of March, 43 in H, and the mission shot down the 18th of March, 43 in C. The squadron moved from Port Moresby to Vivagani Strip, Goodenough Island in July 43, when operations to New Britain became the priority. The squadron moved again to Kirrawhini Strip, Trobriand Islands, mid-November 43, and Kimiri Strip, Nulfa Island, Dutch New Guinea in mid-July 44, and finally to Morotai in mid-November 44. After the loss of mid-September 43, by October, the squadron was in a desperate situation with aircraft and down to 6 operational Bostons, while 2 were undergoing major repairs in Australia. This was then rectified by transfer of A-20As from the 89th Bomb Squadron and used A-20Cs from the US. The A-20Cs became the primary aircraft, with the DB-7Bs still filling an important part in the squadron. By mid-44, with the arrival of new A-20Gs, the DB-7s had dropped into a training role until the squadron was almost wiped out by a Japanese raid on Morotai on the 22nd of November 44. The remaining surplus DB-7s were now converted to components in February 45, so ending the RAAF association with the A-20 DB-7. Camouflage markings. When they arrived in Australia, the DB-7s were new aircraft diverted to the Dutch East Indies Navy with the tail end of from the tail end of an RAAF order. They are in standard RAAF scheme of dark green, dark earth over sky type S. The RAAF markings were overpainted with Dutch orange triangles applied to the fuselage side and lower wings. RAAF markings, which were the standard for the RAAF at that time also, were applied over the Dutch markings. No roundels were applied under the wing initially, and the RAAF A-28 serial numbers were applied over the RAAF AL serial numbers. The yellow surround on the fuselage roundel was soon removed before deployment to New Guinea. All red was removed from the national markings and under-wing roundels were applied. In January 43, roundel size were reduced from 48-inch upper wing roundels being reduced to 24-inch, with the white staying the same size. Serials were in black and squadron codes 36-inch in white or RAAF sky blue. Still comes into conjecture on that because the sky blue fades very quickly to a white. So it's if you're doing the model and it's sky blue or white, it doesn't matter. They're all going to be white eventually. In mid-43, 2-letter squadron codes were applied, DU. These were 24-inch high also and wide or RAAF sky blue. Roundels were standardised 24-inch 5:3 ratio. The DB-7 stayed in the standard scheme of dark green, dark earth over sky their whole lives until June 44, when the new RAAF scheme of all over foliage green came into use, and roundels were changed to 48-inch 5.2 roundels, which did not suit the side of the Boston fuselage. Variations. As DB-7Bs crashed on a regular basis, some aircraft 3 or 4 times in their career, the sky type S on lower service was repainted in RAAF sky blue. The dark green and dark earth was only repainted when absolutely necessary, with aircraft getting very faded and rough looking after the reapplication of foliage green in July 44. Foliage green was generally not used on the DB-7s for touch-ups, but dark green. The freshly lined patches of dark green look much darker in black and white photos. The original faded paint giving the impression of use of foliage green. This image below, this is the one that talks about in your father's logbook about the aircraft getting damaged. See, it's got a replacement out of the wing. That was taken off A-20A, which crash landed and was written off in Port Moresby in January 44, and then kept in storage. Had the replacement flap put on, and it was all damaged around the tail. And then this is an artwork thing to actually show the damage more easily. You can see that's the pre-43 roundel still applied to it, as opposed to this with the reduced roundel and the touch-up and all the damage around the tail. Wing Commander Keith Hampshire with crew in A-20A-15 Spirit of Sport. This aircraft is usually associated with Bill Newton. This was his aircraft. However, he only flew it 3 times on operations, despite the fact that he is constantly talk about it being his aircraft. It got damaged in December 42 and was out of action until March 43. So, and by then he was shot down a few weeks after it came back online. So he hardly ever flew it. It was taken over by Bob Wines, who flew it on more than 30 missions, and that became his aircraft. Keith Hampshire was not a popular CO. He was quite arrogant. He was a stickler for discipline. Dinger Bell, the CO before, was a stickler for discipline, but he was a results man. He didn't mind if the crew shared tents together with officers and NCOs. He was looking at the end result of the squadron and morale. Keith Hampshire, on the other side, was absolutely down the line. He had the crew separated again, everything like that. Charles Learmonth spent most of his time as the XO being the filter between the CO and the troops. When Keith Hampshire was posted out, they had a massive piss up in Port Moresby, and the aircraft couldn't fly the next day because everyone was hungover. That's how popular he was within the troops. Spirit of Sport, the other side. A-20A, that's the machine that restored at the RAAF Museum. J for Jessica. The pilot of that, it was always called Jessica, but he never painted the name on it because he's always embarrassed about putting it on, despite the fact it was known as J for Jessica. You can see there in the tail, you can see a 303 sticking out the back on that one. And that's and then these are that's Hooley F. Dooley, that's Spirit of Sport, and then that's F, which was the model I've got here. This is DUJ after it crashed at Goodenough Island in September 43. This mission on 12th of September was the worst mission that the squadron had during the war. They lost 3 aircraft in the one mission to Gasmata. 2 aircraft were shot down with their crews and they weren't seen again. Harry Rail flew this back, lost hydraulics, belly landed it, broke its back, written off, which was a good thing because now we have the restored aircraft at the RAAF Museum. There's 2 more photos of it when she's written off. Wing Commander Edmonton on the strike mission with Kirraween, December 43. He was killed a couple of weeks later flying a C model over New Britain. She's Apples was Charles Learmont's aircraft. It was called She's Apples because the gunner had a habit of, that's the artwork of it. Whenever they came back and the ground crew asked, how was the aircraft? And his gunner usually said, She's Apples. And so that was that. This flew 77 missions. There's one of the propaganda things from the war saying this had a Pacific record of flying 186 missions. It didn't. Once again, it was a bit of propaganda thing. This is another constantly misidentified photo. In a lot of books, they say DUY was Newton's aircraft. It wasn't. He flew C when he was shot down. DUY is A-20A-18. It got to the squadron because it crashed in Australia and was rebuilt again. It got to the squadron in January 44. And by that stage, it was getting the modifications. You can see the ADF antenna's been added to it. And it's got, you can see the wiggly line underneath, so, which is an indication of a repaint. So she'd be in RAAF sky blue under there. F still flying. There's K still going. Whiskey is one of the C models that was delivered in October 44. There's N, which is another C model, and that was the only C model that was painted in a dark green, dark earth scheme. In July 44, the remaining DB-7s were crudely repainted in the field and all over foliage green. These patches you can see on the aircraft is actually the dark earth showing through the foliage green when you actually look at the big blown up photo. There's one of the C models, DUU, that's 28. And that's one of the new G models in the background. Yeah, the C models ran the guns separately. In the Cs, I'll go through the guns on them. They ran a different nose. This is just after the attack in November 44. These remains here are the remains of the Bostons that were all written off, just been bulldozed up in the pile and over the back. These are the 3 remaining DB-7s in the now all over foliage green scheme. They were all scrapped within a month of this photo taken because and when they converted to Beaufighters. This is the original scheme as delivered and at Richmond. This is a machine that crashed at Woodford and was written off and was converted to spares to keep the others going. That's Hotel. That was the machine that Bill Newton actually flew on his 16th of March mission when he got his Victoria Cross. That was the machine he's in. When it got back to Darwin, it was so badly damaged, it took 3 months to repair. They took a wing off this aircraft and fitted it to DUG, which was 6. Then H, when it was finally rebuilt, had the ring replaced with an A-20A wing that they got from the Americans. So the thing of them not being the same, it was because the A's became a primary source of spares for the DB-7Bs. It's C, that's an aircraft that Newton was shot down in. She's sitting in 300 feet of water off Salamaua now. Hopefully one day someone will go and dive on it, and it should actually be in pretty good nick still. That's F. That was the gunner in that was Moss Bailey, who I knew till he passed about 2 years ago. He was actually the gunner that threw the life jackets down to Bill Newton in the water. DUK, that's Charles Learmont's aircraft. He flew on more than 50 missions of a total of 77, and it's how there and the DU was added in the thing, and you can actually see the old roundels in the paint underneath, and the red where it was painted out, and then the change in roundels and the nose where they were repainted because it had damage on the nose on one mission. So that's just new paint, not other colours. DUY, after she was delivered to 22 Squadron in January 44, ADF antenna fitted, sky blue underneath, and the DU code. The DUL, which is one of the survivors, as you can see in the artwork, you can see the dark earth is actually showing through the foliage green. They didn't do a very good job of painting them. And by then, see the ADF antenna had been fitted to them to bring them up to more modern standard. This is just tables, the history of each aircraft. I've gone through what they did. Eventually, this will all go off to ADF serials and update their site because it's been a while since I've got them to do that. All right, part 2, the A-20Cs. The A-20C and A-20A aircraft operated by 22 Squadron were all second-hand aircraft acquired as attrition replacements, September 43, and 22 Squadron is in dire straits. So the 22 DB-7s the squadron started with in early 42, losses have taken them down to 8 aircraft, 6 operational at the squadron and 2 at 3AD getting overhauled, rebuilt. The radon gas motor on 12th of September 43 was the most costly for the squadron's operational history at the time. 3 aircraft lost, 2 of them with crews. 22 Squadron is barely operational with 6 remaining aircraft. Steps have been taken earlier in 43 by RAAF HQ to source additional aircraft with agreement with the 5th Air Force to take over ex-89th Bomb Squadron A-20As and A-20Cs were also made available by the US. These A-20Cs arrived at US Air Depot at Eagle Farm in September 43. When the 9 A-20Cs arrived, 4 initially were made available to the RAAF and 5 going to US air depots in New Guinea as attrition aircraft. As large numbers of new A-20Gs were about to arrive in Townsville to completely re-equip US units, these A-20Cs were considered surplus to requirements and handed over to the RAAF over the next couple of months. These A-20Cs are left over and partially converted from the P-70 night fighter program. Hence, they're a rather unique setup. Had no guns and no bomb racks. Part of the P-70 conversion was removing the cheap blisters with the 430 cals and replacing with 250 cals. In addition to 250 cals mounted in the nose, with kits developed by Douglas for P-70s and A-20Bs in North Africa. On the P-70 modification, in between these 2 nose guns sat an AI antenna. Radar antenna was installed. This position was filled with a third 50 cal in RAAF A-20Cs and a strike camera installed in the nose behind the bomb aimer's glass, which was retained in this strafer conversion. The A-20Cs ran 5 50 cals, 3 in the nose and 1 in each cheek position, replacing the 30 cals, plus a single 50 in the upper and lower guns positioned. The A-20Cs also had long-range tanks fitted, and unlike the early DB-7s and A-20A, still retained their 2,000-pound bomb load, even after the strafer conversion. They were also the fastest version of the A-20s and could do almost 300 knots at low level. In addition to these A-20Cs in May 43, negotiators with the 5th Air Force agreed when the 89th Bomb Squadron dropped below a sustainable number of aircraft, 15, their A-20As would also be transferred to the RAAF. This level was reached at the 89th in October 43. As new A-20Gs were coming, 9 A-20As were handed over to the RAAF. Some of the A-20As were kept as hacks and training aircraft by the 3rd Bomb Group. That enabled the 3rd Bomb Group to be the only, or 89th Bomb Squadron was the only squadron in World War II to operate A-20 aircraft from the day they started the war to the day they finished. They converted A-26s, but they still had A-20s at the end of the war. And that was the information about the A-20Cs coming into Eagle Farm. This is the paperwork saying that when they get down to 15 aircraft, the 89th Bomb Squadron will hand them over to the RAAF. So that was the paperwork following up on that. The dire need to get these A-20Cs online as soon as possible meant while technically serviceable and more capable than the DB-7s and fully operational, looked very rough as no time was allowed for repaints. These aircraft operated in originally applied olive drab over neutral grey, with at least one with a black lower surface and one in the night scheme, obviously from the P-70 conversion, with only US stars and bars and serials roughly painted over and RAAF markings and serials applied, which is by the time they were issued, the 22 Squadron looked very rough. These A-20Cs became the primary aircraft of 22 Squadron, being faster, longer ranging and able to carry a heavier load than the DB-7s. The DB-7s, while still mainstays, became secondary to the new A-20Cs. Also in late 43, the A-20As handed over to the RAAF came on strength at 22 Squadron. These were older than the original DB-7s and were all war weary, with all being 50 to 60 plus mission veterans with the 89th Bomb Squadron from late 42 through all of 43. Before coming to the RAAF, these aircraft did serve an important role at 22 Squadron, taking the training away from the operational A-20Cs and remaining DB-7s, and also being broken up for parts to keep the A-20Cs and DB-7s going. The introduction of the A-20C saw the tempo of ops increase at 22 Squadron, and now the operations over New Britain were the primary task area for 22 Squadron. The increased range and navigation equipment, ADFs, had been fitted, so the A-20Cs was needed. Also in early 44, as wireless operator air gunners were coming to an end of tours and being posted out, they were being replaced with navigators. The core of WAGs was kept at the squadron to train the navigators in gunnery and radio, but as little to no aerial opposition was being encountered, it was more useful to have a navigator on the long overwater operations 22 was now doing. The Great Race. Not long after receiving new long-range A-20Cs, 22 Squadron conducted some missions over New Britain with 30 Squadron Beaufighters were assigned as escorts. 22 Squadron's pride was hurt that they needed escort as they believed the A-20C was faster than the Beaufighter or any Japanese fighter they may encounter. Twice Bostons had beaten Beaufighters home to base after joint missions, and the race was organised for Melbourne Cup Day 43 to see which was faster. Both squadrons prepared aircraft. 30 Squadron prepared both via the 1C A-1954, as 1Cs were faster than the Mark 6s and Mark 11s, which they were replacing the 1Cs. And 22 Squadron prepared A-20, A-24 DUP. Wing Commander Townsend used all aircraft. Both squadrons went to work with zeal, stripping all armament, armour, radios and all non-essential equipment from the aircraft and polishing to a high sheen. 30 Squadron stripped more than 2,500 pounds out of their Beaufighter, and 22 Squadron did similar with the Boston. The race was to be adjudicated by Squadron Leader Jeff Atherton, CO of 75 Squadron on Goodenough Island in his Kitty Hawk. Unfortunately for the Boston, the overzealous ground crew removed the intake scoops for the carburetors, thinking it would reduce drag. Instead, it caused problems. On the day of the race, Squadron Leader Bolton of 30 Squadron flew by himself in 54, while Wing Commander Townsend took his WAG, flying off some McClintock with him. The aircraft flew approximately 50 miles away from Tribriand Islands, back over Vivagani Strip on Goodenough. Both aircraft applied full throttle and dove on the mark of Squadron Leader Atherton, soon left him behind. The aircraft were clocked at 305 knots at sea level. Now the problem started for the Boston because the intake scoops had been removed, the engines running too rich, and black smoke from the unburnt fuel was streaking out behind. This doomed the Boston to lose, but only by about 400 yards over the course distance. The Kitty Hawk was left several miles behind, which Squadron Leader Atherton was to say, why did they even bother needing fighter escort? Both engines in A-20, A-24 were damaged in the race and had to be replaced. There was going to be an investigation of Wing Commander Townsend for writing off 2 engines, and there was going to be a re-race. It never happened. Squadron Leader Townsend was shot down the next day in A-20, A-29. So there was no investigation. Wing Commander Woodman, a later CO of 22 Squadron, when they converted from Boston to Beaufighter, flew both aircraft on operation configuration at top speed and said the speed difference on both was almost identical, with only pilot skill and conditions deciding which was faster. Of note, during the race, a speed of 305 knots was recorded by the Boston and Beaufighter, and an operational configured aircraft top speed of 280 knots. A Mark 8 Spitfire had a recorded top speed at sea level of 295 knots. So these aircraft were fast. Most things they talk about Spitfires being 400-mile-an-hour aircraft, that's at altitude, not at sea level. The Beaufighter and Boston, with the engines, they were set up for low-level ops, and they were friggin' fast down low, which a lot of people don't really think about. And that's a painting of the race. Evidently, there was Americans based on Goodenough. There was in excess of $10,000 changed hands in bets on the race, which was quite a bit in those days. This is the nose installation of A-20C. You can see it's got 350 cals across the top, while the DB-7s had the guns down through the bomb aimer's nose. And you can see this used to have an antenna mounted on it, and they've added the third 50 cal in there. This is one getting serviced, and in the nose here, it's hard, you can just make it out. There's a strike camera mounted in the nose. They used to also use the C models for reconnaissance, because they could actually come in and get photos as they're coming into a target and flying away. Then they'd have the gunner in the back actually taking handheld photos as well, so they're actually able to get double shots. This is the installation that was developed. This is an A-20B in North Africa, and you can see the guns are in exactly the same, the 2 guns are in exactly the same places, and they kept the bomb aimer's glass. So that the kit, the nose kit for the A-20Cs and those was actually developed by Douglas, while the earlier one was actually developed by Pappy Gun in Australia. That's the CO at the time, Chris Sugden, and you can see how far the 50 cal stick out instead of the 303s are almost flush, and the 50s stick right out the side in the cheek positions. Looking down at another C model through the lower gunner's position, you can tell it's a C by the single 50 cal, the upper ADF antenna, and just the general rough look of the aircraft. This is one of the new photos I just got. These have never been published before. This was in January 44. This second aircraft here, DUQ, I was able to confirm that code belonged to A-2826, which was one of the serials that I had missing for the identification. So I was really rapt when I got that. You can see that's DUY. Now I can tell these two aircraft and the time frame, because this aircraft was delivered on the 1st of January 44, and that one was shot down at the end of January 44. So this was taken in a 3-week period. In this photo, this was the most Bostons that have flown in a formation. There's about 12, I think, up in there since early 43. There's another one, that's all of them. There's 6 in that one. And there's these, when I actually blow them up on a 60-inch TV, you can just read the squadron code numbers, letters on them. So that's all of them. Yankee, Quebec, Kilo, November, Foxtrot, Papa, Whiskey, Lima, Uniform, Golf, and Mike. By May 43, a third of these aircraft have been lost. That's another one looking out across the ocean with them. A-20, A-25, the only C model in the standard Boston scheme, a dark green, dark earth over RAAF sky blue. Like all the A-20Cs, it was rushed to 22 squadron, but only a week at 3AD, after a week at 3AD. It's original olive drab. I believe it was the olive drab, but it could have been one with a black belly or the one that was in the night scheme, because we were in November 43, so it'd only been with the squadron a couple of weeks. A 250-pound bomb with a delayed action fuse that had a faulty fuse that blew up under the aircraft, causing major damage to the belly and wings. So I went back to 15 ARD and they repaired it and repainted it back into standard RAAF markings, that RAAF scheme. That's the standard scheme. That's on DUU A-20, A-28. You can see there, they're pretty rough. The original gun blisters, you can see when they were taking off, and there's still the primer paint and everything from where they were fitted underneath when they put the 50s in the cheek positions. 350s in the nose, ADF antenna, and the various markings. This one I'm able to identify because there's a couple of them had the loop antenna. The majority had the teardrop. There's a picture of uniform at Kamiri Strip, August 44. Now this one, this guy here is in the way because that's a Boston I can't identify, and if he wasn't there, I'd be able to get the code. Because looking at it, it looks very dark underneath, and this one might have been the one either in the night scheme or the black belly, because it's very rough. Yeah, if he wasn't there, I'd be right, because you can see there's definitely the grey on this one and on Whiskey, and that was Whiskey, which is the other one. Once in, see, this has now got, it's got the different type of ADF. The football, yeah, the potted ADF. So, and that's one of the things I use for identifiers in identifying photos of the aircraft. There's one of Whiskey in flight. I've got some others which the angle you can actually confirm it is actually grey underneath, not black. You can just see the edge of the grey here, and there's a little bit there. There's another one I've got where it's banking away, and you can actually see it does have a grey belly. It wasn't the black one. A-28-31. Never went to 22 Squadron. It was kept in Australia. It was damaged and became a training and test aircraft. This is the way they were. Still had the glass nose on them, but with the 50s fitted, part of the P-70 program. Because when they had the P-70, all the radar stuff was mounted in here with the 50s. This has got the later ADF antenna. This is also the only Boston operated by the RAAF that had tropical intakes on it. And she was in the proper post-June 44, all over foliage green with the later 5.2 roundel. And that's her at 3AD. This is DUB, one of the old A models. Once again, it went through 15 ARD and was repainted. This aircraft, when it was with the 89th Bomb Squadron, was actually a veteran of the Battle of Bismarck Sea. So that only ever did, there's only 3 missions ever recorded by the A models with 22 Squadron. Of the 9, I think 4 were broken up for parts to keep the rest going. They just used them as training and hacks. That's DUB in flight. This is A-28-39. This is an A model that didn't serve with 22 Squadron. It was shipped back to Australia and was based at Ambley. 3AD stripped it completely, back to bare metal. Took the guns out, took the armour out, natural metal. Very fast aircraft. It was used until the end of the war as a training and test aircraft. It was also used as a chase aircraft for various aircraft. It was only when we got Mustangs and Mosquitoes but they had an aircraft that could actually fly faster than the Bostons at sea level. And that's it at Amberley in 45 and up at Oakey. Markings and schemes. The A-20Cs and A-20As ran standard 30-inch 5.3 roundels. There were some variations in the ratio of blue and white in the field. Sky blue squadron codes and serials and standard fin flash. It's generally believed, except for A-25, 28 and 34, all A-20Cs and A-20As at 22 squadron remained in the standard olive drab scheme. And so few photos exist of these two types, it's believed they never got the later all-over foliage green scheme as applied to the DB-7s. I think a lot of the time they thought olive drab was close enough to foliage green, so they just left it at that. The two oddities, A model 39 and C model 31, were the only ones to have the later post-June 44 markings applied. A-28-39 had the markings applied as per instructions of 48-inch 5.2 bomber roundels, later square fin flash and serials out from under the horizontal stab. A-28-31 was modified markings. It had the 32-inch fighter roundels applied, which suited the Boston better, and serials back under the horizontal stab. It was realised squadron codes wouldn't fit unless they went over the serials, as happened with the later batches of A-20Gs. A-28-31 was also the only Boston to be properly painted in the all-over foliage green scheme, and the DB-7's repainted was done crudely in the field with old colours showing through. And then this is the history of each of the A-20Cs, what happened to them, their original names with the US service. The US didn't keep as good a records. I'm trying to actually track down, and these are the losses of the various aircraft. I'm trying to track down the, and then part three, the A-20Gs. I'm trying to track down US records of missions, but they weren't as thorough as the Commonwealth forces with their mission logs. This is the part three, the DB-7, the A-20Gs. The A-20Gs, unlike all the other previous Bostons, were not unintentional acquisitions or hand-me-downs, but brand new aircraft, either direct from the US or stocked from US air depots in New Guinea. Apart from 6 early second-hand A-20G-10s added as training aircraft, the remaining 23 A-20Gs were new, very late model A-20G-40s and 45s. These aircraft were a huge increase in capability over the earlier models. Bostons with 9 50 cals, a Martin power operated turret with 2 50 cals replaced in the open guns position, 6 guns in the nose and a 9th one in the belly. By the first quarter of 44, 22 Squadron was nearing the same predicament they were in late 43, losing aircraft and no spares and a big drop in sortie rates. But unlike the supply of second-hand A-20As and Cs to keep 22 going, this time negotiations at RAAF HQ and 5th Air Force organised a complete re-equip of 22 Squadron with brand new A-20Gs. The US 5th Air Force had sufficient new A-20Gs to completely re-equip 22 Squadron with new aircraft. The difference with the A-20 to other US acquired aircraft like the B-24 and B-25 was the A-20s were on loan to the RAAF, not lend-lease. In June, the first of the new A-20Gs arrived at Amberley for assembly and fitment of Australian mods. The 12, 50 to 60 and 64 that went through 3AD had a unique Australian modification carried out. A strike camera fitted to the rear of the right-hand engine nacelle. During bombing runs, a handheld camera was used through the lower gunner's hatch to capture bomb damage assessments. When the camera was used, the lower 50 cal had to be swung out of the way. Strike camera modification consisted of fitting a camera in the empty area of the rear of the right-hand engine nacelle. The rear fairing was truncated and the camera set to look back at the detonation point for the bombs during low-level strikes. This allowed the lower gun to remain in place and be used to fire at ground targets. After prep of the 12 A-20Gs at 3AD and 3 more through 1AD, the new A-20G started arriving in 22 Squadron in late July 44. These 15 aircraft were joined by 8 more attrition aircraft from spare 5th Air Force stock at Finchhaven. No missions were flown by 22 Squadron in May and July 44 and only 3 in June, as the squadron moved to Noompha Island and prepared for the new A-20Gs. The squadron now fully equipped with new A-20Gs that went into the highest mission tempo of the squadron's operational service. 22 Squadron flew approximately 420 missions from mid-August till the last Boston operation, the 7th of December, and flew in excess of 100 missions in August and September, something it never achieved in the DB-7s and A-20Cs. In the previous 21 months, 22 Squadron flew 880 missions. In 3.5 months, the A-20G ops have flew almost half the number of missions achieved in almost the previous 2 years. While 22 Squadron was achieving its enviable operation mission record, unbeknownst to the squadron, RAAF HQ was looking to replace the Bostons with Mark 21 Beaufighters. As DAP was turning out more Beaufighters than the RAAF could operate, and to consolidate types, the decision was made to convert 22 Squadron to Beaufighters in early 45. In the meantime, 22 Squadron knew nothing of this and was preparing their remaining 6 DB-7s for the training role. Armament was to be removed and the remaining DB-7s were going to be transferred to Amberley, the former Boston OCU. As previously, all training on Bostons was either done on piecemeal, on aircraft at Amberley for repair, or done with crews when they got to the squadron. When 22 Squadron lost over half their complement in Bostons from Japanese night raid on Mauritania the 22nd and 24th of November, the end result was 5 destroyed, 7 so badly damaged they were converted to components, and several badly damaged. Operations was severely curtailed for some days, while the remainders were repaired and 22 Squadron looked to secure replacement aircraft from 5th Aircraft stock. At the same time, RAAF HQ brought forward the transition of the Mark 21 Beaufighter. When 22 Squadron was told of the upcoming conversion and re-equipment with Mark 21 Beaufighters, they were not happy. Many of the squadron had previously done tours or instructed on Beaufighters, much preferred the Boston. It was easier to fly, easier to maintain, had longer range, much bigger bomb load. But despite the apprehension of the squadron, it gave up its beloved Bostons and converted to the Mark 21 Bows in January 45. The remaining serviceable A-20Gs were returned to the 5th Air Force stock at BIAC, and the remaining DB-7Bs, A-20Cs and A-20As were converted to components. Camouflage and markings. The A-20s were operated in standard US colours of olive drab over neutral grey with medium green scalloping on the top surfaces. As they were on loan from the US, they stayed in this scheme, though there were some variations in marking applications. There are 4 main groups of marking applications. The 12 aircraft that went through 3AD, the 3 that went through 1AD, the first 4 attrition replacements, the second 4 attrition replacements, and the 6 early -10s. 50 to 60 and 64, these are 12 aircraft that went through 3AD had all US markings neatly overpainted. The official RAAF markings applied as per the new marking instruction in May 44. 48-inch bomber 5.2 roundels applied in all 6 positions, large 18 by 24 fin flash, and full A-20A serial numbers on the fuselage side in line with the leading edge of the horizontal tab. It was found the 48-inch roundel did not match the aircraft the size of the Boston. The squadron markings to fit had to cover part of the roundel and partly obscured the serials, which was not supposed to happen. 60 and 64 had their roundels reduced to 40-inch. 61, 63, these 3 went through 1AD. They took a different approach. 1AD realised the marking size and layout did not suit the Boston, so varied the markings. 32-inch fighter roundels were applied in all 6 positions. The serial was moved back under the horizontal stab to the fuselage side, leaving room for the fuselage side for the squadron codes to fit without touching the roundel or obscuring the serial. Also, a fin flash was not applied. 65 to 68, these 4 attrition replacements, 22 Squadron had their markings applied at 22 Squadron, not as per aircraft depots in Australia. Like the first 15, the markings applied was, unlike the first 15 in Australia, that was more haphazard. The US markings and serials were roughly overpainted, no fin flash was applied, and the serials were shortened to just a 2-digit aircraft serial. A-28 was not applied to these aircraft. 28-inch roundels and squadron codes applied. 75 to 78, these last 4 attrition replacements had even cruder markings applied. The US star and bar was retained on the wings, and only the fuselage side markings having RAAF roundels applied. Squadron codes, no fin flash, 2-digit serial under the tail, but US serial retained on the tail, and these aircraft were loaners, and recent friendly fire incidents when supporting US ground troops have decided to leave the US markings on the wings. 69 to 74, these second-hand A-20G-10s only had US markings painted over and 28-inch RAAF roundels applied. and the 2-digit serial. They never had squadron codes applied as they were training aircraft only. There was one major oddity in the A-20G markings. All the A-20Gs had DU letter on the left and letter DU on the right, except for 3. A-2859 DUM, A-2867 DUV, and A-2868 DUX. These 3 had DU letter on both sides. No one knows why. So you can see there we've got DUC and D. You can see the serial numbers had to be overpainted because these are actually the official scheme. Fin flash and the squadron codes touching or going over the roundel. Flight of 5 A-20s. The easiest way I pick, if I can see a fin flash, I know it's the original 12 that were at pre-AD. If they don't have a fin flash, then I know it's the later ones. That's a lineup of them. You can see there we've got DUE, DUA, I think, which is one of the that's DUA, that's DUX, and I've got the other. When it's blown up on a big TV, you can actually make them out. DUH. This is after the raid because you can see one of the new Beaufighters is there, and this is waiting to be returned to 5th Air Force stock. Some of the stuff behind here, these palm trees, is where all the wrecked aircraft were pushed. DUJ, as you can see there, the D is actually overlapping a good lump of the blue roundel. Fin flash. Now there's one of the others. I think that, I'm not sure what it is, but see no fin flash. So that's not a 3AD aircraft. This one was. You can see the truncated modification on the back of the engine nacelle with a strike camera to look back at for their bomb damage assessment. Loading ammo in the nose of an A-20. In the background, here's the 417th Bomb Group. They operated right beside 22 Squadron. So they had a ready supply of parts and tooling, which they just borrowed off the Yanks whenever they wanted it. This is DUF. This was, as you can see, this is in the standard 3AD markings, the official markings. 48-inch side roundel, which is too big for the airframe. Squadron code cutting into the roundel. Serial being overpainted. Fin flash. This is also one of only 3 G models that had any form of personal items on it. This one had mission markings on the right-hand side. And that was the crew of it, Flight Lieutenant Glenn Murray and Flying Officer Rollins. They were KIA in A-2855, 23rd of September. Glenn Murray was an extraordinary pilot. He was also a test pilot. And in his logbook, he lists, he used to fly aircraft out of maintenance on their initial test flights. And his logbook goes Kitty Hawk, Spitfire, Beaufort, Beaufighter, Boston, and he just went from one aircraft to another. He was one of the flight commanders, and he would have been a future CO. And his navigator was and he was the standards officer for the squadron, and his navigator was the senior navigation officer in the squadron when they were shot down. DUM, this is with its unique back to front squadron codes. Once again, the fin flash, and it's just in, this is pretty rough around here because it actually had damage. So it got repairs around the top fuselage on one of its missions. That's why it looks a bit rougher than the others. And that's it there in formation. And that's after the raid in November 44. She was written off. DUP, this was the CO's aircraft. This is Colin Woodman's aircraft. Had the highly polished spinners on it. It was the only one with nose art. Named Hilda Shane after his son, his wife Hilda and son Shane. Squadron leader as he was then, Woodman was a bit of a stickler and he didn't like artwork on aircraft. He reckoned they should all be plain. His fitters, because they were next to the 417th, which had beautiful artwork all over their A-20s, they were hoping to do it. So this is the centerfold out of the May 44 Esquire magazine. And they painted it all up, did a beautiful job of it, hoping he'd approve it. And he went, no, it can stay on my aircraft, but it's not to be applied to any other aircraft in the squadron. So that's the only one that had artwork on it. That's him sitting in the cockpit after the artwork was applied, looking less than impressed with the artwork that's been applied to his aircraft that he didn't want. And that's a better one of the artwork. And that's Hildesheim did 22 missions, and it was before it destroyed in the night raid in 22nd November. It's flown 20 times by Colin Woodman and twice by the pilot that flew F. That's DUP undergoing repairs after it was badly damaged in the rear fuselage during a raid on Ambon, 15th of October 44. We've got a lot more photos of all of the damage. DUS, now this is in 1AD markings. You can see they went with the smaller, the fighter roundel. The serials were moved back under the horizontal stabs. They actually saw the serial in that. No fin flash, and that's DUS. This one was being used because when the A-20s were replaced, they actually used them as shuttle aircraft to fly people around because they're fairly quick. And this one crash land, had a brake failure at Lighty, ran off the strip and cleaned up 3 American Corsairs. That was written off. DUV. Once again, this is the later markings with just the serial. No fin flash, no serial, no nothing. And that's the left side of it. And you can see the right side of it there with DUV. This is one of the -10s, all the old US markings overpainted and just in RAAF roundel. That's one of a front of a -10. This is Topsy, another one. This is only the third aircraft that had individual markings on it. Once again, only RAAF markings on the side. Still got the US serial and underwing markings. And that's left side of it, and there's the right side with the US marking on it. And then through the history of each aircraft and what happened to them. And that's it.
Well, that was terrific.
No problem.
One, before I hand over to other ones, the privilege of asking the first question. Did you get Juanita to do all of those just for you?
Yeah. Yep. I've got probably 20 in there, all different aircraft. I've got most of the squadron in profile art. I've got probably, I was doing them all, but the next one we're going to do is all the art on the DB-7s. The others, and she's going to do one of just all the artwork for the noses of each aircraft with the art. So
it's Juanita Franzi, who does a lot of international work as well. She's very, very good.
yeah, don't ask me what it cost. I just pay it when she.
So
I just tend to leave.
I would have liked to have asked, but I thought, no, that's not the right thing.
If I get the full thing, it works out about 200 a print initially. If I just get the profiles, like some of them in the presentation were just online, or profile she sent, she hasn't actually, we haven't actually printed them out.
Yeah. Okay. She and I work together on some other things as well.
She sends a lot of work to me because I'm so pedantic with a lot of the stuff. And she does books, and I'll get on there and go, yeah, you got this one wrong, Juanita. And she goes, I know, I should have asked you. And then I'll list all of the.
Okay.
Because my other pet subjects are Catalinas, Sunderlands, and Beaufighters. So.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll start questions in-house before we go to online. And if you can wait until I can arrive with this thing each time, please.
Thank you. With that rear firing gun on the top of the fuselage, do they have an interrupter gear so that you can't shoot your own?
No, that one of the A-20Cs, DUW, actually had the 50 cal fired through the fin, and they had to get a fin off another aircraft and fit it, and then it was flown to Port Moresby for overhaul, and it never came back to the squadron. So they were on the ground, and he put a 5-round burst of 50 cal through his own fin.
It would be so easy to do if you had an aircraft behind you, following them, and suddenly, oops.
Yeah, well, lucky they very rarely had air combat. They usually used the guns hanging over the side as against ground targets.
Thank you.
Any more from any more? Yep, here we go.
What I have is an anecdote. When I was at 23 Squadron, we were tasked with refurbishing 2 Bostons we pulled out in New Guinea, which you know about. One was for the New Guineans, one for us. And I invited Col Woodman down to have a look over the aircraft there. And the one thing he told me, it was the best aircraft he ever flew. That's before he got killed in a car crash up the Sunshine Coast.
Any more for any more? Yes, here's one.
Yeah, just, I know this is pedantic, but you used, the wording you used with early on with changing roundels for the aircraft that came from the British buy. We've got a piece of, out of Amberley, we've got a piece of refurbished side panel off of the aircraft that shows all the roundels that are.
Yeah, I did all the research on it.
Yeah, well, the yellow's still on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
Okay.
painted out. I actually got there with a magnifying glass and a scalpel and actually went through the layers and actually went back through each layer of paint to work out which was.
So that was your work.
Yeah.
Well
Yeah.
done. Yeah, but just the language you used, you said it was removed. It's
The
it's
yellow
still
was
there.
removed. Well, it was overpainted initially, and then the Dutch triangle was put on.
Yeah.
And when they got to Richmond, they had the full 4-colour roundel applied. Before they went to New Guinea, the yellow was painted out and the red was painted out.
Second lot of yellow.
Yeah.
Okay. That I don't know if you know, they are now working on the museum up in Papua New Guinea,
Damn.
and they've done preliminary planning to move ours up there. We're told in about a year's time.
Damn. They found
Yeah.
the money that wasn't skimmed away.
Damn is right.
Yeah, just a curious question. Who fired the gun, the machine gun in the tail,
The top gunner.
the top gunner?
Yeah, he had a lever that he could actually pull and fired the gun at the back. It only had tracer ammo in it. They just had a 200-round belt of tracer ammo. And it was
Okay.
basically a scare gun to get them out of behind the aircraft to bring them into the field of fire of the his rear guns.
So it wasn't the pilot with a periscope.
No. The 50 cal had a limited traverse on it. On that one, they fitted the one aircraft, but all the 3.0s were fixed. And they just fired tracer out the back, just basically scaring to brake left or right and bring him into the field of view of the gunner.
Anybody online who wants to ask a question? Okay, thank you very much, Sid.
No problem.
Most appreciated. I enjoyed every bit of it. And thank you.